Hello and welcome back. This is the 35th video in the Flow Certified Professional Online Training Series. And in this video, we're going to look at how Flow turbocharges Scrum and Agile. So we're going to look at the Scrum Framework, then we're going to look at the Scrum plus the 4D model, and how the 4D model is basically a mirror image of the product backlog, sprint planning, the sprint itself, the iteration, and the retrospective. Most of you who are looking at this video have by now, hopefully, since it's almost 20 years since the Scrum Framework was published, this framework should be very familiar to you, and if not, you're going to learn a little bit about it. But basically, it consists of a product backlog, and this is a prioritized list of work that needs to be done in order to create your potentially shippable product increment. And then when we talk product, I mean product, service, and result, those three. And so you've got your product backlog, and then you have your sprint planning, and the team gets together, and from the long list, they choose the items that they believe are going to deliver the most value for this potentially shippable product increment. Once that sprint planning is done, and that's done with also the Scrum Master and product owner usually, you create the sprint backlog. Once the sprint backlog is set to go, then the team will go for 2 to 4 weeks. The iteration is usually called a sprint, and they'll go 2 to 4 weeks to get the work done. Typically, we try to keep the sprints on the same cadence. So if you start with a 2-week sprint, keep doing 2-week sprints to the end. If you have higher risk in a project, make the sprints shorter. So shorten it down to even 1 week if you have to. If the Scrum purists are yelling, oh well. They meet daily, and in that meeting, it's basically, what did I do yesterday? What did I do today? Do I have any blockers or obstacles? And I add a fourth question of who is the individual resource that can help me remove that obstacle. So I use a 4-box for the daily stand-ups. At the end of the sprint, there'll be a review with the product owner to see, did these match up? And then the team will meet separately and have what's called a retrospective, which is part of the continuous improvement, and they'll try to figure out how can we do things better. Now, the way we do Scrum and Agile, and there's a lot of people out there saying, oh well, Agile's not just Scrum. That's true, but over 70% of all Agile teams use Scrum. So you need to be aware that Scrum is the primary method. More than 2 out of 3 efforts or teams or projects or whatever, they're using Scrum. So we're going to use Scrum for demonstration purposes. Now, when we look at the vision and strategy, this is we're going to be using the VSPT across the top here, and then we're using the definitions, the define, distill, deliver, and drive. So we're using VSPT and the 4D model, and I'm going to use a little bit from I learned this long ago, probably 10-12 years ago. I'm trying to remember where it came from, but anyways, it's really good because the definitions, you're going to create the product backlog. In old traditional, they would have tried to structure it as a work breakdown structure according to type of work and not value. It's just that's a different way to do it. So the team gets together, and you got your product owner, and you got some team members here. And the product owner saying, hey, I want this gold diamond. And when he's describing it, team member 1, she sees a blue triangle, and team member 2, he sees a green circle. So instead of seeing the golden triangle. But as they're talking and they're distilling and they're doing the sprint planning and creating the sprint backlog, that's distillation. You're going to distill agreement. And as they're talking, they realize, well, it's not gold, blue, or green. It's actually purple. And actually, what we are talking about is not a diamond, triangle, or circle, but this star. And so now they have distilled agreement, and the team can go and deliver. And so if you get the first 2 steps done correctly, definitions and distillation, distilling agreement, you can go ahead and do the delivery. At the end, the product owner is going to look at that potentially shippable product increment, and that's product, service, or result. And you're coming full circle to the VSPT, because you look here, its vision and strategy is in the big product backlog. But people and tasks, that's the sprint planning and creating the sprint backlog, what needs to be done. And for the delivery, that's just doing what you said you were going to do, and that's, again, people and tasks. So now we've gone, as far as VSPT goes, it's VS, PT, PT. Now we're coming back to VS, because we're going to review it, and the product owner is going to look at what was delivered, the result, and see if it aligns with both the sprint backlog, the sprint planning, and the product backlog. And so we're coming full circle in the VSPT, because we've gone VSPT, and now we're going back up to V&S, bringing it back to the strategy via the review and the demo. Another way that I draw this is as a sandwich. So you got the VSPT up here, and you can clearly see that this is the flow-based Scrum, and underneath it becomes a sandwich. You're sandwiching the vision and strategy with actually being able to deliver what you said you were going to be able to deliver, and that's the whole point of the 4D model. One thing that I want to highlight here is that the product backlog should encompass the entire vision for the product. Was working with a couple of teams last year, and it was really interesting to see when true distillation occurred. Okay, now you'll notice, I'm going to come back to that in a second. You'll notice here vision is not traditionally included in the Scrum framework. So when you saw that on the last slide, there's no vision there, and vision should drive everything. And when you're checking out that incremental product, service, or result, it better have gotten you one step closer to your vision, or you just did a whole 2-week worth of sprint, and it ends up being basically a throwaway. You don't want to do that. The product backlog should encompass the entire vision for the product. But as I was going to say earlier, sometimes true distillation doesn't happen until you're 2 or 3 or 4 or 5, 6 sprints in to the effort. I had 2 teams last year. They were going through flow-based Scrum, and both teams in the 3rd sprint, they had built their product backlogs and they had all their lists. In the 3rd sprint for both teams, and they didn't start at exactly the same time, so it's sort of staggered. But both teams, when they got to the 3rd sprint, they looked at the product backlog that they had up on one wall, and then they were looking at the work in front of them on the other wall. And they're looking at the backlog and at the work, and then they looked at the goals, because we always have the vision and mission up in the room, and then the goal for the sprint, or the goals. And as the team was looking at the goals, they said the things in the backlog aren't going to deliver what we need to do in the way of the goal. And suddenly they started writing down the things that they really needed to do in order to deliver the goal. And that's the point in time. And for these two teams, it happened right at Sprint 3. That's the point when true distillation started to occur. And so when the team realized that, it was really fun. And I'm watching this. And so 1 or 2 sprints later, maybe 3, 4 sprints later, I'm working with the product manager who is also coming up the curve to be an Agile coach and a Flow certified professional, and working towards becoming a Flow certified trainer as well as a Flow certified coach. And I was teasing him. I said, "Hey, when did the team hit true distillation?" And he's just racking his brains. Maybe the question threw him, but I caught him off guard, and that was fun. And he's like, "I don't know." And so, and the Agile coaches were both like, "Ooh, where's he going with this?" And they were both sort of like, "Well, okay, we give up." And so when I explained to them what I observed, they both went, "Oh, yeah, that's what the teams did in both cases." And so there are things that they don't teach you in regular Agile about when the teams actually start to step into a state where they can enter into flow. And until they can do true distillation, they're not going to enter into a true state of flow. And so that's why vision matters the most in all Agile methodologies. But they don't really call it out explicitly. And so that's the one correction that I'm making to the Agile methodologies, and even traditional. It's even worse because they're even worse at doing this. And so by making that one single correction, you just increased your odds dramatically of being able to actually succeed in delivering what it is you want to deliver. So we're almost 70% complete. We talked about the Scrum Framework. We talked about the Scrum with the 4D model, how the product backlog is basically your definitions. Sprint planning and sprint backlog are your distilled agreement. Your sprint with your iteration and daily stand-up meetings, that's deliver. And then the retrospective is a key component of drive. And we used all kinds of tools. We used the flow friction analysis for the retrospectives. We used the team health check as a retrospective tool. We used all kinds of tools from Flow in the retrospectives to help the teams come up the curve, both maturity-wise and performance-wise. So you can go out tomorrow. If you're doing Agile right now, you can go out tomorrow and begin to use the 4D model with Scrum and Agile. I just showed you how to do it. It gives you leadership flexibility. Man, your retrospectives are going to become way more effective when you're linking the results of what you just did back to vision, mission, and goals. Exactly as the story that I shared with you about when the team actually started to do true distillation. And what's interesting with these teams also is that achieving sprint goals will slowly replace points as your key measure of progress forward. Points are a proxy variable in many cases, and at best. I am very much lean towards not doing planning poker, okay, and doing no point planning, because the teams that I've worked with where we've done the points and then not the points, we save maybe 10-15% in overhead administration, And over the length of a development project, that adds up to a lot of time. And then by using VSPT right across the top in that sandwich, remember we had the 4D model as the bottom part, Scrum as the meat, and then the top part is VSPT. VSPT used correctly will help you eliminate the disconnect that exists in every organization. But I think the way that we just showed it gives you very clear, concrete examples of how to take what we do in Flow out of the book and actually use it.